welcome. We have another fourth of strangers to discuss. This time my book club read chapters 49 through 71. So after this, we have just the final fourth to go. I'm super excited to hit it. This section, as has been the case like every time, ended on essentially a cliffhanger if you don't read on to the next chapter. So I really want to get on and do that. But first, we have discussion questions that I posed to my book club, and then just my review, like I've been doing. Alright, so the very first question that I asked of my book club this time, in chapter 55, we see the return of Rosa. So I asked kind of what their thoughts on her being brought back into the story were, and spoilers, I guess, if you haven't read chapter 55, but this is why I phrased it that way. But do you think that it was worth punishing her since she tried to steal from the family? And it kind of like, is that why she got involved in this and all that? And personally, I find it a little strange that Rosa got involved back into it. I was just kind of like, why would you bring her back? Yes, she tried to steal from the family, but she doesn't seem like part of the rest of the punishment stuff that's going on with the family, so I was a little kind of perplexed at why she got brought back. But what do I know? Maybe it made sense in a way that I'm just missing, and not knowing like the killer's full motivations at this point and stuff. Maybe it'll become more clear later. But even with some of the other stuff that came later in these chapters, I still don't feel like it makes sense to have brought Rosa back, and based on some of the things that were said, it makes almost less sense to have brought her back. So I don't know. I'm torn on having brought Rosa back, especially to have killed her and stuff. Anyways, moving on. Our next question comes from chapter 59. In this chapter, Drew gets asked to reveal his secret to the family. So now we've had both Drew and Anne ask to reveal their secret to the family, and they've both refused. But seeing this theme and this element to it, I asked my book club if they thought that that was kind of the killer's motivation, in part for having done this to the family, is that he's like, oh, you guys are like strangers to each other, and you have all these secrets from each other, so if you reveal these secrets to each other, you'll be less of strangers to each other. And if that's kind of like the motivation to have trapped the family this way. And I would say yes, especially based on stuff that gets revealed in later chapters. My answer to this question is yes. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward in that way. But I did like that I basically predicted that before the more reveals that came with it came in these chapters. And that I had like written out this question, and then it kind of comes back and I was like, oh yeah, I think I called that. So that was kind of fun. And then question 3 on page 229, which is still within chapter 59. It's right after Drew has been killed. Jerry is glad that he doesn't touch Anne and that he doesn't get her shirt bloody, and he has this thought that he wants to keep her clean for as long as possible. But then my philosophical mind is like, but can any of these people really be considered clean when they've got all these secrets that they're hiding from each other? So based on the fact that this came from me and that it's a fairly straightforward question, you might even be able to guess that my answer to this one is that no, at least like metaphysically or figuratively, I don't think any of these people could be considered clean, even though he wants to try and keep her at least physically clean. So yeah, there's that one. Okay, so question 4 then kind of relates to chapter 62, but then earlier in the story as well, because in chapter 62 we get the killer's perspective again, And the last time that we had the killer's perspective was clear back in chapter 17. So I asked my book club if they wished there was more of the killer's perspective in the story, if they'd missed having the killer's perspective in that long stretch where we didn't have the killer's perspective, and if they liked that now the killer's perspective is back. So, I talked about it in my last video, but I had definitely been missing the killer's perspective. I was like, oh, you had it early on, and now it's not here later, and I don't understand why that's the case. I kind of liked having his perspective and seeing his thoughts, and that was really interesting. But now having gotten back to his perspective, I do like that he was gone for so long, because the stuff that gets revealed in this chapter, I feel like tied things in well and was like a good bookend to all the things that had been happening and that we were getting from Jerry's perspective. And I do feel like it was a good break to have made that decision not to come back until this point, and it helped add a lot of suspense and things. So even though I was missing it before I'd read to this point, having read to this point, I was like, oh, actually I like this decision that he didn't come back until this point. So things change as you read along, you know? But yeah, that was that one. And then we'll talk about it more in the general review stuff. But I found a lot of sort of thematic quotes in this section. So my final question that I posed to my book club is based on one of those quotes that I found. It's on page 241. And then the quote is, "He couldn't help himself. Like a sense of hope wasn't just mental. It was built into humanity's bones and muscles, drilled into their DNA. He couldn't help but hope, no matter how futile it might be, no matter how much it might kill him when the hope turned to hopelessness." So I posed to my book club the question, do you think that Jerry's hope is going to be futile? Or do you think someone is going to survive this encounter? And I think that where I'm at with this at this point, I even tried to reread some of the prologue to try to confirm it, but I'm still not sure. But I think that the prologue is going to turn out to be one of those prologues that's actually like the end of the story to get you interested in the story, kind of the thing. Where it's almost like a frame story, like here's what happened and here's how we got there is the rest of the book. And I'm not positive, the details don't entirely match up, so I might be wrong, but my thoughts is that Jerry is going to survive and that he's going to turn out to be the guy in the prologue who is muttering crazily to himself in the kitchen. That's my thoughts on this, so that's where I stand on that. But anyways, on to a general review of this bit. It was good to feel some of the ramping action. It was terrifying to start getting some deaths in this section. I really liked when the killer calls out to Sherry and pulls her into the darkness away from the family. There was a lot of theming with just like darkness and stuff in general that was great. But then too, as I mentioned, I found a lot of quotes that I thought fit thematically with what Michael Brent Collins is trying to do with this story. So I want to just read some of my favorite quotes that I found within this as well. So very first on page 219, I wrote down, his family had transformed into a group of strangers, alien and cold. And this I liked not only just as like a thematic thought, but because I had kind of called it in previous reviews for other sections where I was like, oh, the story is called Strangers because the family all has secrets from each other and they become like strangers to each other. And this quote basically called that. And so I was like, yes, I got the theme. I like calling these things. It's very satisfying to me to have like kind of predicted things like that and then to have them come up and be like, yep, I called it. It's very satisfying. And I mean, maybe in some ways it's not as good of a story if you can predict so much of it, but I really appreciate that in a story. And I think that's part of why The Woman in Cabin 10 was so frustrating to me, because I thought I was predicting things and then the story would just go off on these lines that were like, where did you come up with that? Why did you go that route? So, yeah, so I'm really liking that I've called some of that. All right, and then the next quote I wrote down is on page 221. The safety they felt behind their gates and inside their walls had really been the false security felt by animals caged in a slaughterhouse. And it was just kind of a fun line, but I also really liked that, like, for a home invasion story, this is like the essence of a home invasion story. That it's like, you think you're safe within the walls of your house, but you're not really safe. It's a false sense of security. And I was like, this is perfect for a home invasion story. It's like a description of a home invasion story, and that was really fun. And then on page 226, my next one is, darkness is a funny thing. It covers us, and we fear what it conceals. Then it comes away, and all too often we find that the light is far, far worse, which was one of Jerry's thoughts and was really interesting since the family's having all these secrets revealed throughout. So if it's thematically there for them, but then you have it juxtaposed against the killer, who is like, I love the darkness is my friend, it's where I can hide and be comfortable, and so it adds just some really interesting elements that way. And then the next quote I wrote down starts on page 228 and spilled over into 229. The empty space between them had filled with secrets that were now more comfortable to bear than the affection they had once had. Oh, I was like, there's several of these that are like the breaking down of the marriage that I was like, oh, these lines are so good. So depressing because it's the breakdown of a marriage, but so good. The next one is also that. It's on page 229. Love doesn't die all at once or in big steps, he thought. It dies in tiny pieces, daily decisions that nip off bits of it like the edges of a living branch until you've cut away to the heart of the trunk, and then that is gone and there is nothing left. And oh, so good. And so interesting that even after this family stuff is when that hope line comes in. And so it's like he's faced this like breakdown of his marriage, but he still is finding a hope even if it ends up being futile. And so it's so good. I love how these quotes are like building into this big theme. Then the next quote I had is page 240. If his life had taught him anything, it was that prosperity brought suffering, that any promised improvement would hide threats and danger. Life was never a garden paradise, and any time it seemed to be, it was time to walk carefully and check for hidden traps. And again, kind of fits the elements of like a home invasion story, but then also since he's facing this breakdown of his marriage, all these secrets in his family, it fits so thematically well. And I love that all of this is just kind of built into the story. It still builds the story up. It's not like he's trying to preach these themes to you. It's just that they all fit within the themes of the story anyways. It's great. And then I have just two more quotes. The next one was on page 251. The great advantage of marriage is that you have someone who understands you. The great disadvantage of marriage is that you have someone who understands you. And especially in the face of his like breaking and failing marriage. So good. And so interesting how they're like playing off each other and that they understand things about each other. And it's so good. I love it. And then the final one that I wrote down was page 252. And there was nothing behind the coats and clutter, just like there was nothing behind so much of what he owned, he was realizing, which fits into some of the things that I talked about in earlier sections too, and a large theme of this book that like technology and possessions and things like that are not the important things. I think even the fact that the family all has secrets from each other is very key in the themes of the story, and the message that I would say is an overall theme is Michael Brent Collins is like, your family is important. You should do more for your family. Stop having secrets from your family. Try to be close to your family. Forget about this other stuff. It's not important. And especially in a time of quarantine where we don't get to see even our family as much. It's like, yes. Put value in your relationships. Try to build your friendships, your family relationships. Focus less on the technology, focus less on all these other things. Obviously, the technology can be a useful tool to stay connected, but the important thing should be your relationships and not all that other stuff. So, it's so good. I can't wait to see where the rest of the story goes, and I really want to know what Sherry's secret is, because that was the cliffhanger, is that it's like he's watching the TV. I mean, I'm assuming it's Sherry's secret and not whatever went on with him and the girl. But yeah, so it's like, why did we end on this chapter? Why didn't we just go one further? But every section has felt like that. So I'm really excited to keep reading. I'm really having a lot of fun with this book. I can't wait to see how it ends, which is what's coming up next. So yeah, but I'm going to keep on reading, and I hope everyone else is having a good time reading it too and having fun following along. And that's all I've got for now. This is the Umlaut Harper signing out.